Hello, this is James Merrigan, editor and writer and printer at Small Night Projects. I decided to do this reading of a text I wrote for a launch of a publication I co-edited with Laura Fitzgerald and Alan Phelan. I'm doing this really because we have another launch coming in the next 2 weeks at the Hugh Lane Gallery on the 2nd of December. And I want to just process some of the ideas I came up with about text-based art when I was printing the last publication, which was called Text, which followed 2 other publications, Tone and Told. So we have 4 publications altogether. They're all around A3 in size, and they are there's around 52 pages in each one, and they're all screen printed, and they're exclusively dedicated to text-based art. And what is text-based art? Well, it's really a strange niche phenomenon within the art world. Sometimes it exists as it does in memes with an image, but we are particularly interested in the exclusivity of text by itself, alone, vulnerable. We set out on this project in 2020, well, I did anyway, suspicious of imagery. And that was very much conditioned by social media perhaps, and such things like Instagram. Where the image is everything. So I became very interested in text by itself, and also against perhaps meme imagery on Instagram, like entities, art world entities like Jerry Gagosian. I was going to say Larry Gagosian, but Jerry Gagosian, which has a different spelling of Gagosian with an O. But what was interesting about text as art was the fact that it's something perhaps artists try to distance themselves from in their leaning into imagery. And when it does emerge, or when it doesn't manifest, it becomes very dumbed down. So, and it's very explicit usually. Now we have poetic instances of this, and we have other forms of text-based art all the way back to the 70s and even 60s with Bruce Nauman's Neons. The true artist reveals mystic truths. So on seeing works like that and the shorthand of them, I became really interested in how text exists in the art world as this type of form, this very deliberately shorthand form that is very different than the literature in the gallery, where all this kind of jargonistic language, I think it was called, or it was referred to about 10 years ago as International Art English or something like that. It's the opposite of that. So it's like an outburst, and reminds me of, this seems tangential but it's not, in the film Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock. Norman Bates is in the hotel, and he also has this house up above the hotel. What you discover is that the person he is talking to in the house, which has been overheard by the female protagonist in the story, is not Norman's mother, but Norman's alter ego. So he's doing a mother voice, and he's pretending he's having a conversation with his mother in the hotel, but in fact his mother is dead. So he's reanimating her. But how he reanimates her could be viewed as the stereotype of the mother-son-daughter relationship, where the mother is talking down all the time to Norman, and scolding him with words and in very shorthand and very deliberate, simple language. And it's always debasing him or telling him he's doing everything wrong. This is very Freudian in that it's very connected to the superego, Freud's superego. It's that character on your shoulder telling you you can't do the things you think you can do, that your ego thinks it can do. And there's always this other voice telling you it can't. And it uses a very simple, berating language. And sometimes I think about text art in those terms, that is kind of the superego of the artist, venting or being self-effacing or whatever it is. There's some kind of release in this work. Because it's so niche and it's so strange and so, let's say, antagonistic to imagery, it's interesting. And that's why I and the other editors have committed ourselves to it for the last few years. We're coming on 3 years now. We hope to do other projects which will manifest in different forms. But this latest edition, called Talk, in the last launch at the Douglas Hyde Gallery, we usually give a kind of presentation beforehand. We discuss the artists in the issue, the 6 artists. There's always 6 artists in the issue, and they have 8 pages each. And there was also something that happened the day of the launch at the Douglas Hyde, and I had gone up to see Sarah Pearce's show. She's an American, perhaps Irish artist now. She lived in Ireland for a couple of decades. And she had a very big show, a retrospective in some sense, 20 years of work at the Irish Museum of Modern Art. If I recollect correctly, it was entitled The Scene of the Myth, or Scene of the Myth. And in that exhibition, I'd written a review on it. You can check out Small Night. For that review, Sarah Pearce, Scene of the Myth. There was something in that show that really hit home, and it was a letter that Sarah Pearce had written to other artists to collaborate in a certain sense. And it ended with "Love, Sarah" at the end of the letter, and I found this really fascinating. Just the use of love. Now I go into more depth about the idea of love in the review, and I won't do that here, but I am going to read out the text as an epigraph. So bear with me, I have a cold and I may stumble, but I'm going to try and read this out in one go and not return to it and pretend perhaps it's the launch night. So thank you for bearing that long and winding introduction or prelude to this, and I'll just go ahead. I've also used a Wittgenstein quote, which I didn't use in the previous text, and I think it's important to building on this kind of understanding or feeling around text-based art, which I hope to continue well into the future. Okay, here it goes. This is Sarah Pearce's letter. Dear, I've been thinking about what we do, what it means, how, for whom and why it happens. Much of this includes personal exchanges that surround cultural work. My attachment to your work, for example. Our relationship are a form of dissemination. They are shared condition. I'd like to ask you to take part in a simple project I'm planning in my studio in Dublin. Please send me something that describes the conditions surrounding your work. Something collected, constructed, written or sourced, a work in progress, invitation, article, book, photograph, sketch, letter, poem, object, manifesto, video or CD. Relay an experience or a conversation, something anecdotal, informal and attached. Other people will see what you've given, and if they want to, they can add something too. This is how we'll build an affinity archive. Love, Sarah. Quote, "The meaning of a word is its use." Ludwig Wittgenstein, Philosophical Investigations. Quote, "Talk is dirty, writing is clean." Gilles Deleuze. We, the editors, have been working on this text-based art project for the last 2 years. During that time, a time of conversation, correspondence and production, we've performed an ambivalence as to what this project is, as if it was so present tense or prescient. We have yet to confront its essence, formally or conceptually. We've embraced this ambivalence, even tried to hang on to it a little, in an effort to retain the spirit and energy of what first issue contributor Mark Verabioff calls the first wave. Our launch at the Hugh Lane, Dublin, on the occasion and invitation of Pádraig E. Moore for his curated event I'll Be Your Mirror, Part 2, as part of the Andy Warhol 3 Times Out exhibition, heralds a tetralogy of publications: tone, told, text and talk. What has emerged during this time of production, discussion and sometimes debate is the question of language use and culture. Culture being defined here in philosopher Gilles Deleuze's terminology as resistance. In our small art scene there have been text as art moments that have been ancillary and provisional. But this is what is important about text as art. It erupts and disappears like every speech act. Text as art works differently than the art object. There is something subversive about its literalism, brazenness, and dumbness that seems antagonistic to what we call visual art, which works with meaning covertly through image or form. Text as art is efficiently defined by text-based artist Larry Johnson in an interview with David Rimanelli. Quote, "My job as an editor is to cram a big story into a small space, to forego the short story, to forego anything but the blurb. The idea is to maximize the attention span the reader, viewer, has for the work of art, which I imagine to be equal, say, to that of a daily horoscope or beauty tip." End quote. Text is somehow read as empty in an art context, fugitive, always referring to something full, object or experience of objecthood, or what we might conjugate as object experience. If we take this line that text is empty and dependent on some object experience, then what is an art object? Today we could claim the art object is not resisting its online reification, but leaning into it. Bruce Hanley writes, quote, "Whether abstract or seemingly not, today's art is not produced to complicate, disrupt, intensify or question what anything, the world, existence, etc. is taken to be, nor to move anyone, risking vulnerability, soul, nor even to float new trippy kinds of meaning or meaningfulness or meaningful meaninglessness. It is produced only to have been produced. Reification, I'm pretty sure Uncle George warned, isn't critique, but you know, whatevs. End quote. This could be put down to a hardening of veins on Bruce's part, through years of breaking down art experience with words, which is another form of reification, like these words written or spoken right here, right now. In a sense, we reify with words to make sense of a world and a fate that is outside of words. The stranglehold of identity politics and political correctness via the labeling of things and experience feels like it comes out of a desperation to name the unnameable. In 1976, in his novel Ratner's Star, the American writer Don DeLillo writes how, quote, "To bear a name is both terrible and necessary. The child, emerging from the space-filling chaos of names, comes eventually to see that an escape from verbal designation is never complete, never more than a delay in meeting one's substitute, that alphabetic shadow abstracted from its physical source." In 1989, Slavoj Žižek writes something similar in The Sublime Object of Ideology via Hegel, that the word is a debt, a murder of a thing. If the word is a murder of a thing, and how a thing named no longer exists as a thing or experience in the world, but as a word, what are the 24 artists who have contributed to the 4 issues thus far, expressing or resisting by fetishizing in respect to the specificity and exclusivity that the fetish defines in the name of the word? The answer is something antagonistic. Text as art is antagonistic to what we call inadequately visual art. And yet, text is visual, and there is a lot of visuality taking place in all 4 issues we have produced over the last 2 years. Typed, handwritten, color, font, scale, format, and so on. In a sense, we experience the form and the content, what is being said, at the same time, which is always a kind of intentional dumb, or what co-editor Alan Phelan described as silly in relation to his text and stripe-based paintings presented at Molesworth Gallery, Dublin. We have come to learn that dumb or silly are the most important things for the artist who is considering text as part of their tool bag. We are told in art school to not be literal. Artists who use text in their art are going against this dictate to the point of cliché. They are embracing cliché, believing in cliché, or making cliché more real. These are sentiments or statements that speak the name of art with force and farce. They are essentially dumb, unlike the jargonistic catalogue essays that follow as afterthoughts. Text as art is about puncturing the present, while at the same time vanishing from view. Text as art is about time and timing. Text as art is an attitude tested by the current policing of language. Distilling art into text at this moment of verbal self-consciousness and correctness seems like the worst time in respect to the mainstream, but the best time in respect to art as something distinct from the mainstream. One only hopes. Language is complicated. Artists are complicated. When art and language come together, it is really complicated. But when artists become conflicted, not complicated, art is lost. From the outset, we have asked our contributors to try to avoid at all costs the use of images as a backdrop to text, to avoid memes in essence. This editorial directive has not always landed. Images, or rather the residual effect of images, have survived the editorial process. This is a symptom of the hold images have on us as artists. So why adopt pure text as art? Has the image failed us? Is text as art a recognition of the image's failure to speak for the artist? If so, text as art is a device that gives permission to the artist to express with words that otherwise read or unread in the sideshow of gallery literature. Whatever way we take on text as artists, viewers and readers, whether rhetorically, poetically, politically, formally or ironically, text as art poses a particular type of resistance in the visual field of art, especially at a moment when AI language models are beginning to do the textual work for us, minus the awkward subjectivities and opinions of what it means to be human. Our next launch is on the 2nd of December. Myself and Laura Fitzgerald and Alan Phelan will be giving a presentation for about 25 minutes. The issue also, the fourth issue, will also be for sale for €20, Revolut or cash. I suppose we really want to thank the artists first of all. Kem A, Darren Bader, John Giorno, John Latham, Naomi Sex, Susan McWilliam. It's been real pleasure working with them and thinking through what is possible. There's been lots of editorial, lots of suggestions back and forth. The text hasn't just come packaged. We've had to tease them out and to figure out what is best, or how we think is what is best. There will only be 50 copies available on the night, and we wanted to thank Pádraig Moore and the Hugh Lane, Pádraig Moore especially, who invited us into this event. And it's really motivated us. We were humming and hawing over a fourth issue, and then when Warhol came into the equation, there was just so much possibility, and the artists that reflected what Alan Phelan described as the Warhol milieu, John Giorno, even Darren Bader in a sense. There's a sense that this issue, with its silver ink on the cover, really reflects a kind of a dirtiness around text throughout all the six contributors' work. Even if work is out of that context, geographically or culturally or whatever, they seem in a sense to be in the same thinking through text. That's it. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you on the 2nd of December. I hope I have shifted this cold, and thank you.